King Charles has not abdicated. Buckingham Palace has said so directly, more than once. And yet, walk into St. George's Hall in Windsor Castle on any given state banquet night this year, and what you'll actually see looks less like a king supported by his heir, and more like two futures quietly trading places in plain sight. Subscribe if you want the real documented story behind this transition, not the abdication rumors, not the palace denials alone, but what's actually verifiably happening in between. Start with the diagnosis itself, because everything else in this story sits on top of it. In February 2024, Buckingham Palace confirmed that King Charles had been diagnosed with a form of cancer, discovered incidentally during treatment for a separate, benign prostate condition. The palace never disclosed which type of cancer, and that silence has held for over 2 years now. What has changed, gradually and then more noticeably, is the shape of his public schedule around it. By January 2026, multiple outlets were reporting a specific figure worth sitting with. Prince William had reportedly taken over roughly 80% of the king's public duties. That's not a vague impression pieced together from a few cancelled appearances. It's a concrete estimate of how much of the actual, physical work of representing the monarchy in public had shifted from father to son within about 2 years of the diagnosis. Kate, dealing with her own cancer diagnosis and treatment across that same period, has been navigating parallel challenges, meaning the two people now most central to the monarchy's public face have spent this entire stretch managing serious illness at the same time, in full public view, while the institutional machinery around them kept moving regardless. There's a genuine historical echo worth naming here too, because British royal transitions have rarely followed a smooth, predictable script. The abdication of King Edward IV in 1936, so he could marry Wallis Simpson, brought his brother George VI to the throne unexpectedly, testing the monarchy's resilience in ways nobody had planned for. George VI's death in 1952 elevated Elizabeth II to the throne at just 25. Her 70-year reign became a byword for stability, eventually giving way to Charles's own coronation in 2022 at age 73, making him the oldest monarch in British history to formally ascend the throne. Every one of those transitions carried its own version of uncertainty. This one is simply the current chapter of a pattern that's run through the monarchy for a century. Royal expert Hilary Fordwich, speaking to Fox News, offered language that's since become something close to the standard, on-record description of what's happening. William has been assuming more responsibilities, and there have been genuine preparations for transitions of responsibility. Both William and Kate, in her words, have been readying to assume leadership roles on an accelerated schedule of preparation for their future positions as king and queen. Fordwich was careful to add an important qualifier, one worth repeating exactly. They are not, in any way, actively seeking an immediate ascension. That distinction, active preparation without active pursuit, is the through line connecting almost everything else in this story. Here's where the palace's own language matters most, because it's more specific than most coverage acknowledges. Palace officials have confirmed that Charles's cancer treatment schedule is being reduced heading into 2026, a genuinely positive development, and one the king himself addressed directly in a public message late last year. But officials have also been careful, deliberately so, to clarify that his cancer is not described as being in remission. That's a precise distinction, not incidental phrasing. It's the difference between recovering and managing something ongoing, and it's exactly the distinction that explains why succession planning has continued accelerating even as the immediate treatment picture improves. You don't build contingency plans around a problem you consider solved. That contingency planning goes back further than most people realize. And it started quietly, almost procedurally, well before this year's more visible institutional steps. As early as February 2024, in the immediate aftermath of the diagnosis, sources close to the king told Vanity Fair that a carefully mapped-out contingency plan already existed for scenarios where Charles might be unable to carry out public-facing engagements. William, that same reporting confirmed, was already being lined up at that point to stand in for his father at major fixed events, including that year's Commonwealth Day service at Westminster Abbey, meaning the machinery for exactly this kind of gradual handover was being built almost immediately after the diagnosis landed, not improvised later as symptoms worsened. Now overlay the single most concrete, hardest to dismiss institutional development of this entire period, the Royal Warrants. Traditionally, only the reigning monarch, or, historically, the Prince of Wales in his own right under specific circumstances, has held the authority to grant royal warrants, the formal endorsements that allow companies supplying goods and services to the royal household to display the royal coat of arms and market themselves as suppliers to the crown. Starting in spring 2026, William and Kate will formally become grantors of royal warrants in their own right, following approval from King Charles earlier in the year. As grantors, they gain the authority to bestow a royal warrant of appointment on any company or individual that has supplied products or services to the royal household on a regular basis for at least 5 of the previous 7 years, according to the Royal Warrant Holders Association's own published criteria. Once granted, that warrant allows a business to display the royal arms on its packaging, stationery, advertising, and premises for a 5-year period. A genuinely significant commercial endorsement, not a symbolic gesture. Since Charles and Camilla ascended the throne in 2022, they've used exactly this authority to award nearly 600 royal warrants to companies ranging from Schweppes to skincare brand Heaven Health and Beauty. William and Kate stepping into that same authority represents a direct functional transfer of a specific royal power previously reserved exclusively for the reigning monarch and consort. Here's the detail that makes this genuinely historic rather than simply incremental. According to reporting from InStyle and The Times, Kate becoming a grantor of royal warrants makes her the first Princess of Wales to hold that authority in 116 years. The last Princess of Wales to grant a royal warrant was Queen Mary, back in 1910, before her husband George V had even taken the throne. Princess Diana, despite carrying the Princess of Wales title from 1981 until her death, never once held this authority during her entire time in that role. That's worth sitting with directly. An entire generation of the most famous Princess of Wales in modern history operated without a power that Kate is now being formally granted, years before William becomes king. Royal fashion historian Elizabeth Holmes, author of HRH, So Many Thoughts on Royal Style, told Town & Country that Kate's specific version of this role carries unusual cultural weight, given how closely royal watchers already follow her personal style choices, outfits that routinely sell out within hours of a public appearance. Holmes suggested Kate's ability to grant royal warrants could genuinely reintroduce the entire tradition to a younger generation of royal watchers who engage with the monarchy primarily through exactly that kind of style-driven attention. That's a specific credentialed expert assessment, not vague palace watcher speculation. And it points to something real. This isn't just an administrative formality. It's a power transfer that's expected to have visible, tangible cultural reach the moment it takes effect. Visually, that shift has been showing up consistently at major set-piece events too. At the year's first state banquet, held March 18th at Windsor Castle in honor of Nigeria's president, William and Kate were widely described as commanding the room with a flawless, confident presence. By multiple accounts, radiating exactly the kind of readiness that would be expected of a monarch and consort, not simply an heir and his wife making a supporting appearance. Reports from that evening also noted a stark visual contrast with Charles's own presentation at other engagements around the same period, described in some coverage as visibly tired, even briefly appearing to struggle with his composure during at least one public appearance that same month. It's worth being genuinely careful here about the line between documented fact and interpretation, because some of the specific characterizations of Charles looking frail or exhausted come from less rigorously sourced tabloid reporting rather than palace-confirmed accounts. Real observations from people present, filtered through outlets that lean toward dramatic framing. The underlying pattern, William and Kate visibly, consistently taking on more of the public, ceremonial weight of the monarchy, is well documented across multiple, more credible sources. The specific emotional language used to describe Charles's individual appearances deserves more skepticism than the broader institutional trend it's wrapped around. There's a smaller, quieter data point worth including too, because it shows this pattern isn't only about grand ceremonial moments. This year, William, Kate, and their 3 children skipped the royal family's annual Easter service at St. George's Chapel in Windsor, choosing instead to spend the weekend privately at their Norfolk home, the second time in 3 years they've made that choice, following a similar absence in 2024, the week after Kate's own cancer diagnosis became public. Charles and Camilla attended without them. Multiple outlets noted the absence without drawing firm conclusions about its meaning. But in a family whose every calendar decision gets read for signal, a repeated, deliberate choice to skip a major fixed religious observance is itself a small but real data point about how this particular household is choosing to manage its public presence right now. There's also a genuinely interesting wrinkle in how this planning has reportedly handled Prince Harry specifically, because it adds real texture to how deliberately this transition is apparently being managed. Royal author Tom Quinn told the Mirror that succession planning is being kept, in his words, highly secret from Harry, not out of personal animosity, according to Quinn's framing, but because of a specific practical concern, that if Harry felt in any way slighted or excluded from decisions, he might respond publicly, through media, in ways that could complicate an already carefully managed process. Quinn's broader assessment placed William unambiguously at the center of the planning happening right now, with Charles reportedly fully aware that his son sits at the heart of preparations already actively underway. Separately, other reporting around the same period suggested William had made clear to Harry that a return to royal duties wasn't something being considered, regardless of any interest Harry may have expressed in a partial comeback. Whatever the full context behind that specific claim, and it sits closer to the more speculative end of the reporting spectrum than the Royal Warrant development does, it fits a broader, more consistently documented pattern. William operating with real, independent authority over decisions about the monarchy's future shape, not simply waiting for instructions from his father. Fox News Digital's broader reporting on this period adds one more layer worth including. Broadcaster and photographer Helena Chard has described Kate as fully prepared for what she called her current working shift, with William positioned as the statesman of the two, increasingly center stage on diplomatic missions specifically designed to strengthen the UK's international relationships going forward. Chard's characterization was direct about how deliberately Kate seems to understand her own position. She knew, in Chard's words, exactly what her role would eventually become the moment she married into the royal family, and what's happening now reads less like improvisation under pressure and more like a long-anticipated role finally beginning to take its intended shape. So where does all of this actually leave things? Stripped down to what's genuinely confirmed versus what's still speculation dressed up as certainty. Charles remains king. Buckingham Palace has been explicit and repeated on that point, and nothing in even the most aggressive tabloid coverage credibly suggests an imminent formal abdication, despite headlines occasionally implying otherwise. What is confirmed, through palace statements, named experts, and concrete institutional changes like the Royal Warrants, is that William and Kate are absorbing a genuinely substantial and growing share of the monarchy's actual functional workload, years ahead of when any of this would traditionally happen, precisely because Charles's health situation demands exactly that kind of accelerated readiness. That's not abdication. It's also not simply business as usual, whatever the palace's preferred public language might suggest. It's something in between, deliberately built that way. A king who intends to keep his title and his role for as long as his health allows, and a prince and princess of Wales who are already, functionally, doing significant parts of the job that title implies, in full public view, warrant by warrant, banquet by banquet, engagement by engagement. Kate granting her first royal warrant next spring won't be a symbolic gesture buried in a footnote. It'll be the first time in 116 years a princess of Wales has held that exact power, a fact that says more about where this monarchy is actually headed than almost any single headline could. If you've noticed William and Kate taking on more visible authority this year, tell me in the comments what stood out to you most. I read every single one.